Here we go. Okay, yeah, thank you for joining this impromptu sort of session. Um, Dorian isn't here, but I want to thank him for organizing this stuff and organizing the event. So, yeah, just a little kind of small thing that we're going to talk about. I had a bunch of different people asking me about this, asking me about the little project that I did, like for my personal portfolio in 2019. And someone was like, "Hey, let's just do like a one place recorded session where I could just talk about this at length, get some questions for you folks if there are any, and yeah, just have like a conversation and overview." So specifically for that, I decided to gather like a board of things, like a dug up all the references that I had from the project. So we're gonna talk about this, I guess, in a sort of a step-by-step fashion, and yeah, if see if there are any particular topics that you would like to concentrate on. So if that's cool with you folks, I guess I could start. Or if you have any questions right away, feel free to shoot them. I feel like it would be great to have like a more spontaneous conversation as well.
Yeah, go for it.
Cool, cool. Okay, doke. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to also like ping or just don't be afraid to interrupt me as well. Cool. So yeah, for those of you who maybe don't know, in 2019 I did a personal project for my portfolio, which was essentially like a redesign slash reimagining of a an old game from 1995 called Star Wars Dark Forces. So this was like a first-person shooter. At the time, it was deemed like a Doom clone. These were really popular at the time, and yeah, this was one of the games that I really sort of liked. At the time, I was in 2019. I was in a sort of Star Wars mood, and I was in desperate need of having some sort of portfolio that I could uh, have to break into the PC and console industry. As a matter of fact, I've been in the industry since 2013, like in the game dev industry in general. But I started in the outsourcing and then moved on to mobile games. It was, sort of an easier way to get into the games at the time. This was around 2015. But I wasn't really lucky to get on the project that was released essentially. So, like since 2015 till 2020, um, I was working on several different projects within this sort of mobile studio that I was at. But unfortunately, the main project that I was attached to had really, really tumultuous production, really uh, problematic, and full of issues, and redoing a lot of stuff, rebooting development a couple of times, and eventually, not releasing at all. And I had like a huge gap in my personal portfolio and like in general in my portfolio, and I wanted to essentially make my Behance page stronger and do something just for myself to show off my skills and my design and artistic sensibilities, and do something for fun and hopefully something useful for my future career. And yeah, spoiler, it paid off. This was the project that essentially got me hired at Frontier way back when. So yeah, I feel like this was a really, great and overall positive thing for myself. Um, Yay, yeah. Um, yeah. So, what is this project really? So this project is essentially ended up being a Behance page, showcasing several different sort of more contemporary redesigns of the screens from the old game. You have like your intro screen with like a mission briefing. You have the HUD redesign and also HUD animation, the map screen, and a couple of bits like that. It was really important for me to also not only do static screens, but also do some kind of animations for them as well. And this is why I ended up doing like an after going into After Effects and thinking about all the various different transitions and everything. I'm not sure if yeah, it should be showing a little bit should be is going to be a little bit laggy just because of the nature of the stream. But yeah, the idea was that it all had to be animated to add some flavor and to showcase how I'm seeing all the how I'm imagining all the different transitions and how the elements should be incorporated into the actual the actual layout and everything, how they react to various different states and stuff like that. Um, yeah, so this was the whole project. It all began, I want to say, in uh, sort of late November, December 2019. So I was actually finishing this whole thing around Christmas time, more or less, utilizing several different pieces of software. So, funnily enough, even though it's like a design sort of piece, I started this whole thing mainly in Photoshop because I was looking at the ways I could do the visual side more because the layout was pretty um, sort of simple to realize, if you know what I mean, because the HUD was pretty, I figured it out pretty easily at the early stage. I kind of sort of knew the general direction I was going to go in, but like the details, the actual look and feel of the elements and various different states and whatnot was the thing that I had to figure out essentially. So yeah, this is why I wanted to get into the board here because I feel like the references here, it's really important to showcase them to sort of to guide through to guide you folks through my direction at the time. And we have a new person. Welcome. Please join. Um, so where did I start this whole thing? I start at the beginning. I was I launched the game and I took many different screenshots to get the feel of the flow of what's there. Actually, the actual PC release of Dark Forces didn't have the style screen. This is like uh, a PlayStation version that has this. But yeah, this is the PC. Um, a version of the game from 1995, the briefing, and here's like the HUD and the map screen, the auto map, and everything else. So this was the basis for the thing I wanted to redesign. So I took all these screenshots, and initially I sort of kind of wanted to uh, make the scope a little bit bigger to do like a full proper, so maybe incorporate this menu over here and maybe also do like the various different states for the map, maybe do like a lighter version and then incorporate it into a separate screen. Equipment screen could be done as well and stuff like that. But as I was working on the project, I decided, especially since I decided to animate it, um, I just decided to cut the scope a little bit down to make it leaner and more compact so I could, have something essentially less work for the same sort of output. Um, my initial idea was to take all of these screens from the original game and try to imagine a version of this game made in the new sort of, you know, Disney Star Wars era, essentially. So I was looking at the contemporary um, Star Wars games that were coming out of EA, and I was looking at various different things that they were doing in the sort of similar fashion, what things they were doing differently. My main two um, titles for points of references were obviously Jedi Fallen Order and Star Wars Battlefront 2. Battlefront 2 specifically because it went with like a darker theme. Battlefront 1 was much lighter, had like a white gray sort of background. I wanted to go a little bit darker, and I was really closely studying both of these titles, looking at how they're using, what values they're using in their, um, in the typography, what typefaces they're using, what kind of layouts they're operating with, what sort of effects they're using as well. There's lots of blur here on like darker sort of elements. Um, if I remember correctly, the Battlefront main font in the Battlefront, sorry, was Franklin Gothic with various different weights. Um, Jedi Fallen Order decided to go with a more sort of retro-ish ITC Gothic serif. This was like an interesting sort of thing to look at. So yeah, like my main idea was to take this and try to apply this to Dark Forces in a way, but not just redo the same thing. I wasn't really interested in copying the style of these games right away, right? Because this wouldn't be really interesting, wouldn't really be showcasing my sort of artistic sensibilities as well. And I wanted to look what I can do differently and what could be appropriate for the project like this specifically. So obviously, I was looking at older Star Wars titles from different eras, from different developers and different genres as well, to try to look for inspiration and sort of ways I could combine the approaches from the new contemporary era and like previous titles as well. And so, yeah, obviously Jedi Knight games, which were in the same series as the Dark Forces, but just sequels that came later. I was looking at how they dealt with their HUDs, and actually the where is it? Okay, I can show it like this. Like if you look at the general idea, it's pretty much the same, right? In that regard, the sequels were really faithful to how the original game sort of laid out their information in the HUD and presented all these sort of elements. But then if you look in the at the last game in the series, Jedi Academy, they had a bit of a different approach with their sort of gauges and everything, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. This is sort of different, and maybe I could do something with this. Also, if you look at various different Star Wars titles throughout the years, like just a selection of random games, you could say that uh, the sort of main primary color in a lot of these was blue. Like there are certain shades of blue that are very often repeated. Actually, the Django Fett game isn't that great of an example here, but the main idea is that blue, like you could see in where is it like in like a non-diegetic pieces of design in the movies, like blue is a color that you see a lot in Star Wars, in fact, and like even here, like this sort of shade of blue and the blue here on the screen, uh, it's pretty prevalent. Like lots of blue, and not a lot of blue in the new. Well, as I'm saying it, I'm looking at the mostly blue image here of the map. But what I mean is not a lot of blue in sort of main elements here. They're all sort of desaturated. If you look at the borders, they're mostly grayish white, and stuff like that. So I was trying to think about the way to marry various different eras and various different approaches to design, Star Wars design here. And then I kind of looked at Knights of the Old Republic 2, which was obviously a sequel to Knights of the Old Republic. Um, and whereas the first game was also really heavily leaning into the bluish tones, I was like, hey, wait a minute, this is using something different. This is using sort of green, pale green. I don't know if is it cyan? Uh, yeah, it. I would say it's like more greener than a cyan sort of color, and I found it interesting to the fact that it goes from the primary into the secondary sort of color scheme. And I tried to leverage a similar approach to differentiate my project from all these other projects, but also trying to make my sort of approach, my design, similar. Aquamarine, turquoise, yeah, yeah, maybe these are good examples. Yeah, but you know what I mean. It's like a secondary color. We're going away from the primary um, color scheme into the secondary, and I felt this was interesting, an interesting way to differentiate my work from other contemporary Star Wars titles at the time. Oh my God, I keep yeah, like from these. So here you go. I'm taking the original sort of flow. I'm taking the design approach from the new titles, and I'm trying to do like a twist on them with the secondary color scheme. Okay, there's stuff to work with. We're going to talk about the influence of Destiny here as well, but just to go a little bit further on the look and feel side, I was also looking at obviously at the movies and obviously at the new movies as well. So mainly like TLJ, the Last Jedi, Mandalorian, and Rogue One at the time. These do have slightly different approaches to cinematography and color correction and stuff, but what I wanted to gather, I wanted to collect a number of references that leaned into the sort of greenish tint as well. And I actually found them, like especially in The Last Jedi, there were a lot of examples of um, these color correction techniques where if you look at the like there was a this is a frame from oh my god I think this was A New Hope. I'm not sure, but either way, like from the original trilogy, you can see that there's like a lot of blue in the shadows, a lot of blue in the darker tones and the mid tones as well. And these guys, they leaned more into greenish, mainly because there was like a pinch of general yellow in the color correction process, and it kind of skewed the colors, shifted the colors a little bit, sorry, into a more greenish fill. And I felt this was something that kind of fitted my approach in the project. So I wanted to incorporate the secondary colors in the UI with the overall tone, which was closer to these sets of images, right? So this was still recognizably Star Wars, but slightly different, if you know what I mean. Um, as for the general, or rather, not general, but like a specific approach to crafting specific elements of the UI, of course, I looked extensively at the various different references, but I feel like Destiny was the main one in terms of mm, uh, types of fills that I would be using, the types of shapes that I would be using. Mainly because I always felt like Destiny felt really contemporary, minimalistic, but at the same time somewhat a little bit retro, if you know what I mean. There was a pinch of industrial 70s graphic design in Destiny visual design, or rather, it is for me. Like this is the type of association that I always making when I'm looking at what Bungie is doing with Destiny. Like if you look at just the shapes that they're working with, and even like the decals here on the weapons, you can see that these all these icons. I feel like they wouldn't look out of place as I don't know branding of some technical things in the 70s, for example. And I felt like there was a commonality between this approach and Star Wars in a way because you know obviously Star Wars they were made originally in the 70s and the somewhat retro feel was always there. Funnily enough, like within the Star Wars era, the retro feel came from the original serials that George Lucas was inspired by, like you know Flash Gordon and all these adventure sort of shorts that he watched as a teenager. But now, like for myself, the retro feel comes from the Star Wars itself because it is retro in a way because of the clunky technology and the sort of 70s approach to their visual design. And yeah, I kind of clinked to that idea of taking these bold colors, bold shapes, and trying to marry them with everything that I mentioned prior, right? The contemporary Star Wars look and approach, the secondary colors, and everything else. And this is actually why I also wanted to add these examples to the references. There's a great, amazing um, account called Logo Archive on Twitter. They also have their own website which essentially specializes on a lot of things from the 70s, a lot of logos from the 70s, and like typography work. Great stuff. Yeah, very very inspiring. Can be incredibly inspiring if you're looking for these sorts of things. And I was looking at these things as well, and trying to figure out like what could fit to my project look and feel, especially going a little bit further in the icon work and how to represent various different, for example, ammo types, right, for the weapon wheel that I kind of imagine. So yeah, this was a huge reference for me when starting this whole thing. And of course, uh, I was looking extensively at various different FUI work, fake UI or filmic UI. There are different ways of um, uh, explaining this abbreviation, but yeah. This is about all the different pieces of design, which looks utilitarian, but is essentially flavor in movies and TV shows, and something that is projected on set, something that the characters within the story are interacting with. But yeah, usually it's like non-functional sort of thing. Yeah, fictional UI, film UI, yeah, fake UI. I've heard all of these used before, and yeah, fictional UI is great as well. Um, yeah, so these are the things that characters within the universe, usually sci-fi universe, are interacting within the fiction of the movie or TV show, your story, essentially. And of course, there are a bunch of different projects created by the studio called Blind, if I remember correctly, for several different titles in the Star Wars, sort of movie franchise, and they done a lot of work for, um, I believe, Force Awakens, Rogue One for sure, Solo. There are bits and pieces of things in Solo. So these kind of took all of these fictional UIs from the original trilogy and sort of expanded upon the idea, codified the language, the visual language of these various different visual systems for them to look consistent. Again, a little bit retro, but not too much retro, a little bit sci-fi and stuff like that. So loads of different shapes, loads of different ideas. Again, incredibly inspiring, just in general, incredibly inspiring. I love looking at these. Um, and yeah, recently, like seeing a bunch of these in Endor was really great too, because they're very inventive and they're there to enrich the world and everything. But yeah, for myself, I don't think I actually ended up using a lot of references from these specifically, although I was looking at the idea of like radial sectors and what I could do with these, and also like sectors like these, like would there be fitting to the things that I was doing at the time? Maybe. So yeah, I wanted to incorporate some of these ideas. And also, of course, you can see like the language. This is like the basic language that they're using. So this is like the language here that they're using in Star Wars. It's called Aurebesh. Aurebesh. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but yeah. So they have like their own fictional language, and I wanted to incorporate this as well. It was also used as flavor in Jedi Fallen Order, and I believe they continued doing this in Jedi Survivor. So um, yeah, I wanted to incorporate some of this flavor here as well. Yeah, yeah, these are cool. Uh, and so, what are we having here? So we have the oh, sorry. Um, Step number one, look at the original flow. Identify all the screens that I wanted to sort of adapt for my needs and play around with to create like a flow that I could then work with properly and redesign properly. So that was step number one. Step number two, look at all the different various different references and find out what would I want to do in terms of UI art direction. Make it contemporary to the modern Star Wars games, make them stand out a little bit so that it's still not just a copy of what's there already, but there's something of its own there. Uh, Make it sort of a bit with a hint of retro, something inspired by approaches from the retro typography and Destiny as like one of the examples of a very clean, minimalistic, but still full of character design, and look at how it fits within the actual universe and the existing diegetic elements of the design. And so from then on out, then the next step for me was okay. I'm gonna do the sort of redesign, but I also need to uh, make like I didn't want to make a game, of course, right? But I had to hang my UIs onto something, right? I wasn't just about to take the old graphics and do like the pixely stuff. I wanted to imagine like a contemporary version of Dark Forces. So that needed some work to create the space in which this whole thing would be existing. And so yeah, I just ended up modeling some stuff like doing the texture work, really simple texture work to create um, the essentially like the space with just one point through which you could see like the starting area of the game essentially. I didn't need to make it detailed, so in terms of like modeling work, this is incredibly primitive. It's also been done with JZ Doom because I had some experience working with level editor for Doom. I was like, hey, in there, this is a really really weird sort of piece of software, but it allowed me to get some instant in sort of camera chromatic aberration, nice bloom effects, um, reflections on the floors to make them look really really polished, and also it could allow me to have like a really natural head bob for the character. So like as if in the video it's really apparent like the character is standing and the environment is shifting slightly up and down, just a little bit to imitate like I don't know breathing or just head bob, so that the image wouldn't feel static. So yeah, this was really quick, really dirty sort of work just to create the fake stage for this whole thing, and yeah, ended up um, coming up with all these different mock-ups for the thing. So essentially taking the layouts that I already had from the original game, incorporating the secondary color palette sort of idea, um, and using the typefaces that were really fitting to the actual character of the franchise. And yeah, just creating all these various different elements that could uh, make it look as like a full-fledged contemporary game. Yeah, as I mentioned before, like the 70s influence and Destiny influence was really in these sort of ammo icons over here, and also some of the icons for the uh, thermal detonators and stuff like that. So yeah, also like the icon of the planet and the imaginary map screen and everything like this. It was really helpful that for myself that After Effects, like I composited this whole thing for animation in After Effects. It was really helpful for me that it allowed me to create really convincing, sort of very jittery, very um, unstable holographic projection effect that I used on the map itself and also on Mon Mothma's character in the beginning for the briefing. Uh, and yeah, it was really important to me to make this whole thing compact so that if this was a real game, it would have been really easy to read at a glance, like what's your status, how many bullets you still have, and stuff like that. So that's why I decided to not just create like a full layout, one to one, like in the original, because if you remember, yeah, it was like on the left side, and the right side. I wanted to concentrate it, make it look a little bit closer to Destiny. I feel like in this regard. Mm, yeah, just play around with various different states, some flavor in the form of Orabesh languages. Here and there, and also like these dots, they don't serve any functionality other than just create a sort of divide between like a section for the weapons and the section for the health and shields. And yeah, and then the screen over here. I guess my biggest fumble here is that there's a prompt for setting the marker, but there's no cursor for setting the marker. So I was like, I figured this out way later that oh man, I had to I had to put a cursor there to make it make sense. But if it was like a playable sort of thing, this would have been something that you know I had to go back and just fix later on. Um, yeah, in general, it was really helpful to think about this as if this was a game, right? Keep in mind the flow of the original, um, and think of it as something that has to serve a specific purpose. Like, how do you begin the game? How do you start a mission? How do you do this? How do you do that? If it was a map screen, like I wasn't about to do all the different states for all these other sort of sections, but you have to infer them. You have to um, think about what else might be there in the world of the game, in the gameplay flow. For example, you can see like there's all these different markers for something that's obviously it's not represented on this map, but you can sort of infer again that there's something more, something potentially expanding further, and I feel like it worked really effectively there. As for the technical side of this in Photoshop, so uh, how I started this whole thing, I had a canvas in front of me. I did like a 12 column grid, um, really sort of default. I just had to have something to just make it easier for myself to align elements and to separate them into like thirds and specific places and stuff like that. And yeah, afterwards I just started with shapes. Like essentially, if you imagine that this was no, it's the wrong thing. This was like a Photoshop canvas. I was essentially going, okay, here is going to be a panel, uh, and here's going to be the character, and do I want some hints over here or over here and stuff like that. So for me, it was about doing like the most basic things, wireframing things, and then just elaborating more and more on top of them. Um, yeah, I actually am not sure what else there to add. Like, I do hope that this is pretty self-explanatory, like the project itself. But if you folks have any more questions, please feel free to chime in.
If you don't mind, I had one question. What was the first screen that you kind of photoshopped out? Did a layout on?
I think this was this one with Mon Mothma. This was the simplest one for one, but then this was a great sort of playground for me to figure out um, the typeface sizes and like the things I wanted to do with colors here as well. Is then as you can see like this particular shade of green then went into the health bar and stuff like that. So yeah, this was I believe this was the first screen I did.
That's cool.
Yeah, like and funnily enough, the last screen was this one, the title screen.
Hmm.
I struggled so much with the logo. Oh my god. You- like I decided to go with something very simplistic because originally I had like if you remember like the logo for Dark Forces, the original one, has this sort of metal finish. It harkens back a little bit to the is it Empire Strikes Back logo? Like it is kind of its era of Star Wars in a way. And yeah, I wanted to do something different, and ended up going with something really, really simple. Actually, this font for Dark Forces is made Outer Sans. Amazing font, really great. It's actually free if I remember correctly. Yeah, it's free from personal use, but yeah, quite popular in the design scene from what I'm seeing. And it has like a normal sort of default version, but it also had this sort of fancy version with sci-fi sort of inclinations. And what I did here, so the original, like if I would just write it no caps, the C was inverted and E was a bit like funky. What I did, I essentially edited so the C is back in normal and E here um, is actually edited to oh my god it's actually mimicking the Orabesh symbol. Like one of these, there's a letter. Oh, here it is actually. Here it is. It's kind of rotated over here, but you can see it. It's the same letter, but the E's transformed it to it. And I felt this kind of neat. It kind of slotted by itself almost. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go with this one. Really minimalistic.
Cool. It works with the negative space of the S as well, and like the C. Like it's making that space with the kind of curves there. So
Yeah, a little bit, and also like a continuation here, sort of.
hmm.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a great font, and I feel like it also sold the 70s feel a little bit more.
That's a good one. I was gonna ask another question. I don't want to have a take all the question time.
Go for
Please,
it,
other
man.
people
Go for
jump in.
it.
I really loved all the mood boarding you did and the extensive mood boarding. It also makes me feel like yeah, I'm not wasting my time because I always feel like God, it takes me so long when I'm mood boarding and concepting. Um, but like, what I see like you have a lot of Behance projects and portfolio projects. Like, what do you use as motivational tools to create these projects yourself? I think one thing I struggle with is like I'm so busy with work that I'll just or whatever life stuff that it's
Mhm.
hard to say I'm gonna create a portfolio project today. Like
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
what kind of stuff do you how do you motivate yourself for doing that?
I feel like Screenshot Saturdays on Twitter really, really helped me a lot. Um, if you don't know, so on Twitter, these are these things called hashtags, and with various different hashtags, there are various different sort of initiatives for different communities to sort of express themselves or join a hashtag in some form or fashion. And Screenshot Saturday is the hashtag for sharing your stuff. Usually it's for indie developers or just developers in general to show off game stuff, but like it can be used for general purposes as well, I feel like. And what helps me specifically, I don't know if it's a sufficient motivation tool for everyone, but like for me specifically, it makes me a bit more disciplined about my work. if I'm thinking, okay, I need to have something to show for Screenshot Saturday, essentially. So I need to post something on Twitter on Saturday, um, and it has to be related to my project, my personal project. And yeah, that was something that sort of drove me for a lot of my personal portfolio pieces. But at the same time, it's not like I'm super strictly adhering to it as well. So at some point, you can form your own schedule. But as long as you're kind of systematic about it, uh, this becomes the most important thing, I guess.
That's cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no
It's
worries.
really really useful.
Yeah, I feel like it's it's fair to say about a lot of different activities. Like consistency is the basis for discipline, essentially. So if you're consistent, if you're just have something scheduled for yourself, it can be not a screenshot Saturday event, but just anything else. You're like, I have an hour here that I dedicate to an activity. It can be a personal project, it can be whatever. Let's say it's like an hour every Thursday. Um, I feel like the hashtag thing is great for me as an external sort of motivation because it also, drives engagement on the social network profile and stuff like that. But yeah, for some people, it's okay to have just a slot in the calendar that and it's enough. Like, okay, I have a slot, I have a time frame that I'm going to be working on a thing, and this is the thing I'm going to be working at, and I'm not going to be doing anything else. I'm going to turn off all the chats, turn on everything just for this 1 hour, and doesn't matter how much or how little I'm going to finish in this hour. I'm going to do something for the project. I need to have just something at the end of this hour, and yeah, this uh, works for a lot of people, so it could be adopted as well. All right.
I have a question. Yeah.
Yep. Go for it.
First of all, I love your work. Really,
Thank you.
I really think you landed everything you wanted to make out of this project. Um, my question is more like in the you said this work you made helped you in recruiting process
Mhm.
after making it, right?
Yes.
When presenting this work, did the recruiters ask you for UX flows or UI kit or the behind the process of how did you land on things outside of the UI? Just the visuals. I mean,
Yeah. Well, it's a good question because actually, no, rarely. Uh, because I wasn't. I guess it's just in my specific case, I wasn't really applying for UX specific positions or people that were, or sorry, or teams that were looking mostly for UI, UX leaning people. And I know UX is a incredibly broad term, and it's not just about doing wireframes and flows and yada yada yada. We all understand that, but yeah. So a lot of studios they were looking for something a bit more visual, and for a lot of them, like this project and my other personal projects, uh, were pretty much enough as is in Behance. Um, However, when I was doing tests for, there were several studios that I did tests around the same sort of time. Uh, then I tried to essentially present them as I'm presenting this to you folks, but like maybe with more steps in terms of the actual flow and describing the actual flow. But these were tests that specifically sort of well, they didn't demand it, but it felt like a good idea to um, it felt like a good idea to add this sort of thing to a presentation. So yeah, um, for this specific project, no. For a lot of other portfolio pieces, also no. Um, but yeah, I feel like it does generally depend. This is my personal experience, right? And it depends on types of roles that you're applying to, and um, the I guess the general circumstances. Yeah, and yeah, again, thank you so much for your praise. Really appreciate it. I know that there are specific roles, specific. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. I see a message, Julian. Thank you. You're welcome. Yeah. So what I wanted to say regarding specific roles, like some teams, they're searching for people who are should be there as mostly UI designers, concentrating on the flow, concentrating on the user experience side of the design. Uh, and I guess actually my projects during Frontier are a great example of this because on Jurassic World Evolution, the actual UI art direction for the project was sort of minimalistic, very technical, and quite easy to create new content for right in Adobe XD, for example. You can whip out XD and just do stuff there, and it could be pretty much uh, final, essentially. Like, of course, you couldn't do like all the flavory icons like the meticulously rendered raptors or whatever, but the bulk of the UI could be done there. And so a lot of times, especially like closer to the end of the production, the designers could just uh, do the final thing right in XD. Didn't need to go through other pieces of software mostly. Well, some icons in Illustrator, for example. And this was pretty much enough. We didn't need to have separate UI artists or artists assigned to doing like UI stuff. Yeah, mostly this was just us as UI designers doing the whole thing. But then came Warhammer, and as a part of a very um, uh, rich franchise, a very sort of visually rich franchise, that one of the demands for the project was to not make the UI minimalistic, right? Like this was just natural to try to create the interface, the general interface, as rendered and as beautiful as possible within the constraints of the franchise. And so there, the split was really apparent. The split between UI designers who were mostly there to oversee the flow and the usability side and everything, and specifically dedicated UI artists that were there to essentially reskin the UI design work into creating something, like a high fidelity version of it, fully rendered and stuff like that. Um, I was really lucky to just hop between these two roles, but uh, I don't think it should be required from a UI designer you know, to excel visually in like complex UI artwork. Um, but yeah, so for the positions I was applying, the surface level was pretty much all that the people wanted to see. That makes sense. Um, but yeah, of course there are other roles, and I was also doing interviews as a recruiter, right? As from the recruitment side, looking for people who were specifically into designs, and obviously the flows and uh, uh, charts and wireframes were something that we were looking for in these cases. Any more questions, folks? See lots of lovely emojis. Thank you, thank you guys for this. And I see a question in chat. So this might be a dumb question, but did you have to make the small gun icons on the bottom left yourself? Were they pre-made? Bottom left. So I actually, you mean these ones? I assume, right? From the yeah, for the gun and everything. So all of these are actually made from photos of various different because there are loads of visual references for Star Wars and various different pieces of Star Wars equipment, like diegetic Star Wars equipment, and these were um, photos for like a E11 rifle, for Briar pistol. I don't remember how this rifle was called as well, but yeah, you could find photos of them, and I essentially did like outlines for them and did like created a shape for them and filled them as is. So this was, yeah, pretty easy to make. But the fun thing was that it took more work and took more time to find the uh, how to say it, to find the photos of these in the proper like rotation so they're towards the camera so I could make the icon out of them um, easily. So yeah, yeah, no worries. You're welcome. I see typing in chat. Yeah, finding models is a pain. I think actually for the rifle itself, I feel like this was a 3D model they kind of rotated, photographed, and um, filled in with color. But these might have been different for these two. I feel like the Briar pistol, especially, this was of like a photo. Um, but yeah, 3D models, like uh, if you're doing stuff from scratch, or if you're working within the production that already has access to these sort of parts, to these elements. So, for example, if you were working on a game that had lots of guns and lots of weapons and whatnot, then of course uh, they would just give you could just go to the artists and ask for a model, right? This is what we've been doing a lot in Warhammer, for example, for other stuff. So um, yeah, again, for me, this was essentially a month-long project, more or less. But I wasn't working on it for the whole month, right? It's not like 24/7 or like full-time work weeks. Um, so yeah, I was interested in limiting the scope of it, and if I could find like a shortcut like this, I would go for the shortcut here, obviously. This is why actually, yeah, the Mon Mothma photograph is also like here. This is like a behind the scenes promo, a photo of actress that played Mon Mothma in the cut episode 3 sort of scenes. She's still sort of in the movie in the background, I believe, like a cameo or whatever. But now this actress Genevieve O'Reilly, I think she now plays Mon Mothma in Andor TV series, which is great. But yeah, I sort of took the photo and just edited it, and then in the animation, it became alive because it was all jittery and unstable and stuff like that. It really helped sell the illusion here, and it was really easy to make. So yeah, shortcuts are cool.
I guess just on that note, the
Yep.
item next to Mossa, the one in green,
Yes.
yeah, was that based off like a 3D model already?
Actually, no. Funnily enough, so what I did, I looked at. Okay, yeah. So there was this image in the original, which sort of described the part of it, the part that you had to steal during the mission. So let me just concentrate over here. So my idea was to um, take the same sort of image and try ask myself what I can do with it, and how to make it more fitting with the rest of the design. So what I did, I just did like simple lines slash shapes in Photoshop, and I just um, did like lines that essentially more or less covered like general shape. I improvised some things, like added some elements that weren't really there. So I essentially did like a full front-facing recreation of it with just these green shapes. And then in Photoshop, again, as you can see, like these are all these different imperfections in this image. Like you can see, like this is going like down. There's like a hint, like some rogue pixel here and there. So this is because this was all done by hand. Didn't do like a 3D stuff. I did. I took all these shapes that were front facing and I just skewed them in Photoshop again, duplicated to create like the outer outline, and then just connected the angles to create the illusion of 3D. So this wasn't like a 3D model. This was a static image that um, yeah, was just created by hand, and that's it. It was just quicker for me that way, frankly.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I also see uh, there's a question in the chat. So, what made you decide to make my own 3D environmental space rather than capturing close enough screenshot in Battlefront or something similar? Well, yeah, so screenshots, but not, sorry, not screenshots, shortcuts, but not everywhere, I guess. Because I was aiming for a particular look and feel, right? I was talking about um, a certain look that I kind of picked up from The Last Jedi, and I wanted to create something similar. I also wanted to make it recognizably um, sort of this, right? This was my target, and this is literally like a screenshot from the game. And I was like, it's I couldn't find anything that was the same from Battlefront or Jedi Fallen Order. And I was like, this is a pretty simple shape, and I didn't want to super overdo it. This was pretty quickly done. This was pretty quick for me to do, and like by myself. And so yeah, just opted to recreating this um, at the time in GZ Doom. Since then, I learned Blender much more, so it would have been easier and quicker for me, and maybe even more. How do you say? The final result would have been prettier if I would have done this today in Blender. But yeah, at the time, this was done really quick to do here and to make it at least somewhat recognizably sort of the start of the original Dark Forces. Yeah, so that
Yeah,
was the idea.
I thought it was great. And honestly, I don't know that it needed to be any higher fidelity or fancier because it serves the purpose like perfectly of being in the background. So I loved it. I was just curious what made you decide to do it. It's a cool challenge though, either way.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, by all means, it's I'm not an environment artist, so this was really something to fill in sort of the gaps. And obviously, I feel like the gun also sells it a lot. This wasn't done by me. I credit the artist. Um, this was sourced from Sketchfab as well. So yeah, the full credit goes there. And again, this isn't even like a 3D model. This is like a sketch of a 3D model because I didn't need to do more. Sorry, not sketch, screenshot. Sorry. This was a screenshot of a 3D model that I just had to color correct a little bit. The lighting was fine. Everything was fine. It was, yeah, again, good enough just to sell the illusion because, funnily enough, this is the main thing for the purposes of my presentation. This is why, like, I do have like a separate uh, animation of it just on the black screen. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. One thing is more of a compliment than a question, but like I really love the using the retro game as a constraint for both like the usability and like kind of the requirements. because I find that one of the hardest parts of a portfolio piece is understanding the like creating the gameplay necessities and like the UX flow. But if you have a retro game and you know what you need to like do, what menus you need to go through, it saves a lot of time. So it's a really you've reinforced that in my brain to just keep remaking retro projects I love rather than trying to create something new.
I mean, I feel like, yeah, well, for one, it also creates an interesting, so it's not only a constraint, but it also, and not only a guide, but also um, something that you could subvert in your design. So you could look at the older game and older project and be like, okay, now our understanding of UX and convenience and the flow is different, uh, arguably much comfortable and much deeper and broader in many fields. So that's why you could take something from the old game and be like, okay, now I could expand upon it with our sort of new understanding of accessibility and usability and everything. So yeah, it is definitely great stuff. But like, um, I also in my personal work, I also try to experiment with other things as well. At some point, I was like, well, maybe it's a bit. My work starts to become a bit too derivative. I would like to explore something else, and that's why I try to, not only redo old projects but also do some other stuff. For example, uh, like this Doomcraft project, for example, there's no game that is Doomcraft, but I'm trying to take various different gameplay elements from two different genres and two different projects and sort of incorporate them into one another and see how it's going to look from the UI standpoint, obviously. But here I also had to do like the whole fake game essentially with smoke and mirrors and everything. But the good thing is it's still a lot more quicker than a lot more quicker. Is that even how it says? Anyway, it's much quicker to fake a game than to actually make one. So that's why I'm still opting to doing that for my personal pieces occasionally. Um, yeah.
I was going to say I like the overall use you make of the yellow accents, right? Not only in this project, but overall, for example, in the Splinter Off,
Hmm.
uh, it's super neat the use of the yellow color. I I don't know if for this particular project it was a stylistic decision or it was derived derived from the mood board and stuff.
Oh, well, thank you for one. And yellow is my favorite color, so I try to, even if I don't want to, sometimes it just sneaks in, which is like, I can't help it. Yeah, I feel like it's a really great accent color. Here, uh, this was also used as a sort of accent. Um, uh, I felt like the Star Wars logo, of course, it
Yeah.
is yellow in general, right? So I couldn't not incorporate it here, but also yeah, later on I felt this was also something that could differentiate it from other projects too. Also lean a little bit more into this secondary color palette because it's not like this isn't like pure yellow over here, right? It's like there's a pinch of orange here. It's a bit more desaturated and yeah, what I wanted to do is to just go a little bit away from the just pure whites um, in the palette, because if you look at um, here, for example, um, Battlefront does have yellow accents occasionally if they want to, drive the player's attention somewhere and stuff like that. But it's not super often that they're using it. It's mostly like if you look at the screen, okay, yeah, it's mostly white. It's very, I'm not saying it's not bad by any means. It's just, yeah, it's their approach. And um, in Jedi Fallen Order, it was also very desaturated, and they kind of had their approach there. And for me, yeah, it was interesting to try to inject a little bit more color here and do all these sort of cool things with it. Um, yeah,
Yeah, it shows. It shows. Really.
thank you.
Maybe a second partner, not of that question, but how could you, if you wanted to expand this particular project without making a full game, right? How would you, how could you expand what what would be your thinking process, your design process, your thinking behind what would you make to expand this project to make more screens or something, right?
Oh, it's a great
What
question.
would be your approach?
Yeah, yeah, it is a great question. I feel like um, here this flow is shortened for the presentation purposes, right? Because you go from the title screen straight to mission selection and stuff like that because this was essentially how it was done in the original. So like ignoring this screen over here, so the original started here in the mission selection screen essentially, and then you go into the briefing and stuff like that. So if I were to expand upon my project, I would try to um, essentially put something between these two, uh, like a proper main menu, right? And for here, maybe make it consistent um, with the original, and then add some mission selection and stuff like that. So like expanding to make it like a proper usable flow, if you know what I mean. So yeah, we're not still not making the complete game, but at least we're making it closer to the to the image of the complete game, if that makes sense. Um, and also, I would say make it a little bit more ooh, uh, cross-platform friendly, I would say, because this project, as is currently, is very gamepad leaning. For example, in this screen over here, you have a begin mission, which is actually like, yeah, it's a press of a button. We could do like a press and hold, or uh, I would visually try to, if I were doing this today, I would visually try to make it more look like a button, so that if we go to keyboard and mouse environment, it could have been clickable, for example, uh, or something like that. So think think Fortnite, for example, right? They do. I feel like they do a really good job in like a dynamic switching between the gamepad and the keyboard and mouse inputs. And actually, yeah, Jurassic World Evolution 2 had a great approach there as well. So yeah, I would do that. Think about the cross-platform aspect of it a little bit more, and maybe yeah, just finish the some other screens like inventory and journal here. Why not? Um, uh, Frankly, there aren't super many screens for this. I don't think it would exceed uh, the original too much. Yeah, I would say that most likely it would have been uh, something that would finish sort of the vision of it in the general flow, uh, but not much apart from that. Because then you might as well make the rest of the game. If you know what I mean.
Right, of course. It's my question was not only if you wanted to make more screens, right? Because you can do that. You can make a settings menu, of, for example. But um, my question was leaning more in the realm of well, what you answered. For example, if you would have more like accessibility uh, in in the in the idea, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that that sort of thing. But yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's the thing, right? You're prioritizing for a project like this. You just have to prioritize the essential stuff more, um, and it's just the general, um, how to say it, um, flow of push and pull, right? You're overestimated first, and then you need to cut a lot of stuff. And I guess experience is just um, not overestimating too much, if you know what I mean, right? Trying to limit the scope as much as possible at the beginning so that you have something really functional, really usable from the get-go. But that usually means that some fancier bits or some more thought out bits have to be left out if you're aiming for, efficiency of completion and just the general speed of completion. I would also maybe made Mon Mothma animated more like because currently it's just a static image, but it is animated through the After Effects sort of hologram effects, but it's still like she's just standing there, right? Uh, would have been cool to actually have her, move and lip sync and do all these sort of cool things, but yeah, this is again overscoping at this point. Yeah, all right. Um, I feel like we went over almost everything. Uh, I don't know if there's anything else to talk about in relation to that, but if you folks have any more questions, feel free to raise your hand and just start. Oh, I see typing in the chat. But in any case, like yeah, I feel like we could start wrapping this thing up and. Um, you know where to find me. I'm in the chat. If you're gonna think of any more questions afterwards, feel free to ping me after that. Um, awesome. Well, yeah. Thank you so much, folks, for for attending this. Um, let me stop the recording on this thing, and here we go.